Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about virtual best practices. I'm joined by my colleague, Sarah Specht, who you can see is in a different location, as well as Chanda Gunn, our Director of Youth Services. If you're wondering why Chanda and I aren't social distancing, it's because in addition to working together at the foundation, we're also married to each other. So I promise that we're following all the rules about face masks and social distancing when we're not in our own house. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Let's get started. I want to mention also that Michaela noted that someone's going to be monitoring the chat box and giving us questions along the way if you have them. But I also noticed in the opening poll that many of you have a varying degree of experience running virtual programs yourself. It's showing here now as a few of you have no experience, some have some, but look at how many people already have a fair amount or a lot of experience. So I invite you to jump in not only with questions, but with ideas and suggestions as well. And I also see that we have several of the Epilepsy Foundation New England AmeriCorps members present, and they've been working with us to run a lot of these virtual programs, and invite anyone to share in the chat what you've learned and add additional suggestions. Okay, so just quickly, Epilepsy Foundation New England, we're a nonprofit organization that serves New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Maine, and Rhode Island. In those 4 states, there's 104,000 people living with epilepsy. Epilepsy is a neurological disorder of the brain, and it kind of works like electrical storms in the brain. So when someone has a seizure, they have an overload of electrical pulses running through their brain. And most people are familiar with grand mal or tonic-clonic seizures, which are the kind that cause people to fall to the ground and have shaking convulsions. But there's actually many different kinds of seizures, including brain-sparing spells. People can have just one part of their body shaking at a time. It's a very complex, broad range continuum. EFNE has been serving New England since 1983, and we have a continuum of services from children, youth, and family programs to support groups, community education, education in schools, advocacy and public policy, and fundraising for research. If you know anyone that's affected by epilepsy that hasn't been connected to the foundation, we would welcome your introduction so that we can involve people in our community and make sure they have what they need to stay safe and healthy. So first things first, our pandemic story. So like the rest of the world, we came to a screeching halt the 2nd week in March. We made a work from home option during the 1st week of March, and then we made a work from home requirement during the 2nd week in March. And in that 2nd week in March, we started to think about canceling our in-person services for the coming 4, 5, or 6 weeks. Around March 13th is when schools in our area started closing. And initially, they were announced to be closed for 2 or 3 weeks to the end of March. And of course, as we know, that's lengthened and lengthened and lengthened. So our pandemic story was, okay, now what? What can we possibly do to be helpful to our community? And Sarah and Chanda really worked very quickly over that first weekend of March 14th and 15th to think about how hard the pandemic would be on the kids in our community. So epilepsy is already an isolating condition. Many children and youth who have epilepsy feel like they are socially isolated or bullied, don't have a lot of friends. And common comorbidities in epilepsy are depression and anxiety and stress. All of those things also reduce seizure threshold. So if you're someone who has epilepsy and you get yourself in a really worked up position and maybe you're losing a little sleep, it's more likely that you'll have seizures. So we thought about our community. We have a thriving children's program, thriving summer camp programs, and we also have a thriving Young Leaders Network program, which is for high school and college age students who come together usually twice a month and work on skill building, like communication skills and advocacy, as well as having fun. And really the main point for us is it's an opportunity to build community and make sure people have the social support that we know is so critical to their short and long-term physical and emotional health. So was thinking that we had about 2 or 3 weeks of trying to pinch hit for our community and make sure people stayed safe and could talk about what was happening and process through the pandemic. We created daily programs for kids Sarah created 3 programs a day for children. One was focused on younger, more young elementary school age children. One was focused on more middle school, and one was focused on children that had a more significant amount of disability and challenge. And Chanda did much the same. She started a program that was running at 1 p.m., 4 p.m., and occasionally 7 p.m. every day for our teens and young adults. And at first, we were just trying to be present and be together and ensure that people had, like I say, opportunities to process. We certainly tried to think of fun and exciting games, but we definitely thought we were in it for the short term. And then as things got longer and longer and longer, we realized that this is really going to be a new normal for Epilepsy Foundation New England for quite a long time. For us, why virtual services are more important now than ever, and I'm imagining that most people have a similar experience. This is really hard. It's really hard to homeschool if you have children. It's really hard to find balance. It's really hard to be away from the things that we know and love, from our schools and workplaces or universities, sometimes from our extended family that we can't see because we can't go anywhere. It's really hard to give up the things that we thought we might be doing this spring and summer, like going on vacation or simply going out to eat is a challenge. And then as things are opening back up, it's actually providing an extra layer of stress in our community, and I think it more globally. So when it was clear that you were supposed to stay home and not go anywhere unless you were wearing gloves and you stood 6 feet apart because you had to get groceries, it was obvious what to do. We might not have liked it, but it was clear. Now it's not clear. So is it okay for my kid to see the other kids? Is it okay to be in a pool together? If we want to go to the beach, is that risky? And so what we see is people starting to do those things, but having a lot of increased anxiety about it. So it's more important than ever that we're present for our community, and we're here to support people to be together, to process through what's happening, to feel less isolation. But the other thing about why virtual services are more important now than ever at EFNE, we certainly created all these services as a direct response to our community needs us, but I'm really thankful that we acted as fast as we did, because if you're a nonprofit organization, and I imagine most of you are, if you're trying to stay afloat in this environment, you have to demonstrate that you're providing something of value to your community. And we are able to do that through these virtual services. And it has been duly noted by our supporters, our donors, our corporate sponsors, and our doctors. So we have really become sort of a shining star in this time among our supporters. I'm not saying that our revenue isn't taking a huge hit like everyone's is, because it is, but we are able to be very successful in this environment, which I think will carry us through the coming year safely. In terms of keeping the nonprofit organization together. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so getting started. So here's how we approached it and how we advise other people who are thinking about virtual services or new virtual services to think about how to get started planning your virtual services. First, as I mentioned, our mission and service is pretty clear. We exist to bring people together, to build a circle of support, to build community connectedness. Our value is building community connectedness, and our value is helping people with epilepsy stay healthy by avoiding social isolation, stress, and anxiety. So as we thought about the goals that we need to meet, it was exactly that. How can we help people through this time? Sorry, we're trying to move the screen around because okay. And then what virtual activities can you organize to meet those goals? Unfortunately, we see a lot in a lot of different nonprofit scenarios, not just in the pandemic and virtual services, that people often start with step number 3. So what activity do we want to do? And then sort of tie it into their mission. And we would just strongly urge you to think through, how can we still do the core of what's important to us in this new way? So the reason that we wanted to do this session with you, or offered to do this session with you, is that we have learned a lot. We have learned more than we really ever wanted to know about how to do this well, and we've learned from our mistakes. and we've made a lot of mistakes. This is hard, this is new, it's new for everybody in every space, and we hope that we can tell you things that we learned along the way, sometimes the hard way, and that it'll help you to be successful in your virtual spaces. So patience, flexibility, and grace. First, practice with your friends first. So if you're going to hold, we're going to tell you about some of the activities that we have found to be successful, but if you're going to hold a Netflix party, or you are going to hold a cooking class with your community, or play a trivia game, we strongly recommend you spend a few minutes and gather a group of people that you know and love, or family members, and make sure that all of the technology and systems that you think are going to work. If you're going to use breakout rooms, if you are trying a new approach to trivia, or are just not sure that your computer technology, internet connection has the bandwidth it needs, practice with your friends first. We always make a solid plan, and then we expect disaster. That's kind of how the Epilepsy Foundation rolls anyway, because when we plan, like summer camp, for example, and then we get to summer camp, we have a well thought out plan in the physical space, and then people have seizures, and or it's really, really, really hot, and more people have seizures when it's really hot. So we have to take this well-crafted hiking activity and go inside and do arts and crafts. So I think this is a skill that people with epilepsy have, is to be flexible and switch on a dime. And that was really helpful to us in the last 3 months, and I think will continue to be critical to us in the coming summer virtual camp season. So we always make a solid plan. Here are the activities we think we're going to do this week, next week, or even just today. Here's who we think is going to lead the program. Here's what we think in terms of, we tell our participants, today we're going to, I'll pick on cooking again, we're going to make ketogenic brownies. Here's a list of ingredients you need. And almost invariably, people don't have the ingredients. And so sometimes we have to change the activity or modify the activity so that the person who doesn't have the supplies can participate. So flexibility, expecting disaster. I think if you are someone who is very linear, like I am, and point A goes to point B goes to point C, this can be really hard to get good at. It's really hard for me to get good at being as flexible as is required of services in the virtual space. So it takes practice just to learn to be flexible. Adopt, change, and grow within each program and the program plan. So what we did that first week of March 17th, and what we did last week are radically different things. We started with a program that included virtually all age groups. So we had a teen and young adult program, and then we started to segment the audience based on what we saw about what was working for which group, for example. And in the program plan, we had thought we would be running our virtual teen groups through the end of June, or through at least the third week in June. And then we got to the first week in June, and we realized that everyone was exhausted and didn't want to Zoom anymore. And really, everyone needed to go outside and have a break. So instead of the program that we had thought we would run through the third week in June, we ended up sundowning the program through the month of June and transitioning youth to a different type of engagement. And now we're hoping to get them back for our summer camp program. They needed a break, and we had to acknowledge that people needed a break. How our youth programs have changed. Chanda, do you want to talk about how some of the YLM programs changed between March and June?
It's interesting how the programs have different needs in a physical space and in a virtual space. So there's less need for, we have a 10-year-old, 11-year-old now, who might not fit in at our regular meetings in a physical space, but who runs the show in a virtual space. Versus, and we can serve a wider audience. I often go back to at the end of the meeting, you know, we're struggling. We acknowledge we're struggling. The pandemic has made a lot of changes in our lives that we might be struggling with. But what are some of the positives? And inevitably, we're able to meet more frequently. We get to see each other. We're a closer group. We get to do a wider variety of things. I often ask who has a skill to bring to the table. We do peer-led groups. Your skill that you bring to the level can be very remedial. Hey, let's learn to play drums. You don't have to be a master drummer. We're very remedial. I mean, do you know how to, bang on the table and teach everybody how to bang on the table? Do you know how to sing? Do you know one note? Do you know how to sing a song? Do you know the words to the song? And teach everybody to sing along. The project that, Susan said, adapt, change, and grow, what we start with and what we end with may be two totally different things, and that's okay. I don't know if that's how our youth programs have actually really changed from a virtual space to a physical space, but we're able to do so even more in a virtual space because we're in we're more adaptable, I guess, because we're all at home. But it's also a limitation because we're all at home. So if you plan a art project, for example, we're always picking on art, aren't we? If you plan an art project in a physical space, you bring the supplies. If you plan a very basic art project at a virtual space, inevitably somebody does not have crayons, and you have to always start the meeting planning on 1 or 2 or 3 people sitting in the inappropriate typed seat without the very essential needs that they should have in their house, and planning those first X number of minutes, walking them through how to go in their house and find the crayons, the pencil, the correct seat, and also timing of people arriving.
And I think, a huge part of our success with the YLN, Young Leaders Network program for high school and college-age students is the AmeriCorps program. So our AmeriCorps members have been critical to our success in helping us to reach out to youth and to connect with them between the meetings and to run the meetings with us, especially as we've increasingly used breakout rooms. The AmeriCorps members are really essential to our success. And the same thing is going to be true of our virtual camp season, which kicks off next week. Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit about our approach to Camp 2020? Where is she?
Sure, I'm right here.
I see you now.
So our approach to Camp 2020 is we have a plan, and but we know that plan won't go through, and we are going to have to adapt to everything that comes. And we have many AmeriCorps members that are ready and eager to help with our camps, and we have, 8 weeks, I think, of camps, so ranging in all different aspects, so all different ages. So our plan will be to take the ages and develop them and put them into breakout rooms, so we can build those community buildings throughout all our campers during the time. Camp is something that it never goes as planned. So with this virtual is all new, so we really don't know what will happen when it does happen. But everything that we do have planned looks amazing so far.
Mm-hmm. I think compared to the camps, we have a really heavy camp season every year, upwards of 12 to 15 camps that range from overnight sleepaway camps for kids and families to day-long horseback riding camps. What we have learned also about camp and youth programs is they have to be limited. So you can't run an 8-hour camp. I think the best you can do with the most high-functioning youth is probably 3 hours, and that's if you build in significant breaks along the way during the day. Chanda, I know you wanted to add something. What did you want to add?
What I wanted to add about our approach to camp 2020 is that 2020 is exactly what we've experienced it so far. Oh, hey, Christine. Is exactly what we've experienced it so far, is that we don't know what to expect. You know, the mayor of Massachusetts we're in New Hampshire, but mayor of Massachusetts, and it doesn't matter really, honestly, what state you're in, is that the mayor of Massachusetts just delayed, phase 3. Governor, sorry. It's okay. The governor of Massachusetts just delayed phase 3, and that can change in New Hampshire. Things can open, things can close. Families can come, families can go, and families have different perspectives of what their family's approach to COVID is, and what they're willing to sign up for, what they're willing to do. And what to expect until July, and what to expect in August. And so the strength of our approach to 2020 is going to be our staff. And so right now, our approach to 2020 is going to be a strong staff, and going to be prepared for everything, and going to be positivity, and going to be ready to make mistakes, and ready to cover for each other, and ready to have the families have the best and strongest experience, because really we want them to have a strong experience, to bond with each other, and to get the most out of their camp experience, whether or not it's what they expected at the beginning of the day, and whether or not it's what we expected at the beginning of the day, and whether or not it's what we expected at the beginning of the summer. And that's all going to come from the staff. So right now, what we're doing is working really hard on having a strong team, and that is our approach to Camp 2020.
Mm-hmm. Like, teamwork is essential, and as I mentioned, our AmeriCorps members are essential to our camp success. So we're actually spending this week and next week, I think, ensuring that the members know each other, know how to run programs, are comfortable in the space, and not only that they have the skills, but that they feel they can rely on each other in order to be successful. So we're really grateful to have the opportunity to do this work so well with their help. Alan, are there any questions in the chat?
Not as of right now.
All right. Okay, defining your changing audience. So this is what we did, and you might, if you're just starting out, have to do the same thing. So we used a funnel approach, where at the beginning, during that first week in March when we started doing this, we included pretty much everybody in every group. We put it on Facebook or social media or our website and said, we're having a program for teenagers and young adults. Come if you want to. And then we learned that that doesn't really work as well in this space. And as we got to know the youth better, and we got to see what people were really interested in, we started to segment the audience I mentioned earlier, where we had maybe more programs, but one was focused on older teens and one was focused on younger teens. Or one program that Sarah's running currently is really focused on very disabled, cognitively impaired, physically challenged young people. Those people cannot have necessarily a successful virtual camp experience with high-functioning middle school students. It just isn't a good fit. So we're targeting our services as we go more and more. And then ultimately, we also have niche programs. The one I just mentioned that Sarah's running is actually a niche program that's serving a really specific group of people. And it's challenging us, too, to learn those families and those kids, which is so important in this process. And again, the AmeriCorps members are essential to have us have the bandwidth we need to make sure that we're connecting with kids and families and understanding what they want and how to best serve them. And then for serving people with significant disabilities or cognitive impairment, and I would also add older adults in here as well. There's a lot of hand-holding required, and there's a lot of skill building on the team's part to have the tools to be effective engaging people in the virtual space. In terms of ideal group size, what we have found is that, unsurprisingly, I suppose, the more impaired people need a much smaller group size. Chanda, do you want to add anything about group size?
I think it depends on your group their cognitive ability, and their previous relationships. So if you're running a camp reunion, for example, where most of the campers have previous relationships, I have group size 28, and they do great. And then if you're running a group where their cognitive ability is younger and they need a little bit more support, it also depends your adult or your employee or volunteer to camper ratio. So if they have more support, then you can have a larger camp size. It also depends if it's experience-based. So if they're actively doing something, you can have a larger camp size. Otherwise, I would say 6 to 8 would be a ideal size. A lot of my groups are 10 to 15, but then a lot of my teen groups get upwards to 20, 25, but then again, they all have established relationships. So they all come having watched the Netflix movie, having done the cooking show, having done the XYZ earlier in the week, and having made arrangements to meet. So to each his own, and it also depends the goal of the group, the goal of the camp, and the goal of the activity as well. Is it going to be a webinar type activity, or is it going to be a chat, or is it going to be a therapeutic type group?
Okay, I've mentioned AmeriCorps a few times, but you do need a lot of manpower, we feel like, to be successful in this space. So whether you have AmeriCorps members or other volunteers to be helpful, we at the foundation have a policy in place that every meeting needs to have at least 2 staff or staff in AmeriCorps or trained qualified volunteer, because something will go wrong. You're like earlier today, my colleague Sarah, who's on Zoom 8 times a day, had trouble logging into the meeting. So if that had happened and she was the only one starting a Zoom meeting, then the Zoom meeting the virtual program wouldn't have happened. So it's important to have co-hosts and rely on each other. In our case, too, we often have to prepare for emergency. So if someone is in a virtual program with us and has a seizure, we have a protocol for that we'll share with you, of making sure that person stays safe. We have had a lot of luck asking people for their help during this time. We've noticed that people are more willing than ever to do community service in the virtual space because people don't have a lot of other stuff to do. And unfortunately, many highly qualified and talented people are out of work. So I wouldn't hesitate to ask for volunteers in this virtual environment. And as Chanda mentioned earlier, we've had great success just asking and pushing people to share their skills with us. So what are you good at? How can you share something fun with our children, youth, and families? And this extends into our adult programs as well, where we have a thriving book club, for example, and other programs as well. So it's been people saying, I'm really good at, we have a culinary student who is home from school, obviously has been home, and she's really good at cooking and really has been Zoom cooking with a group of youth, every Thursday at 1 for 9 weeks. So you never know. Photography is one. We had a magician come and do a program with the kids. So I think you probably have a lot of volunteer skill in your community that could really help you to develop a wonderful program. And so as we think about programming, we've mentioned a bunch of fun activities, and that's usually when people ask us about our virtual programs, they are looking for what activity would be engaging to our population, what's worked for you, and we're going to share a bunch of that with you. But we also encourage you to really think about why are people participating in programming online right now. And in our view, it's 2 things. It's connection, not activity. It's wanting to be with people, regardless of what we're doing. Some people may not enjoy cooking and may not come to that program if they don't enjoy cooking, but most people will come because of the people that are there, because the people they know they will see, even if it's an activity that isn't something they're particularly interested in or something that they even particularly like. We tried a hip hop class in the spring, and we really didn't think it was going to work because we think young adults in particular are really, can be embarrassed easily and can be shy, and it's been really shocking how successful the hip hop program has been. And I think it's because the kids are coming because they've gotten used to seeing each other, they've gotten used to seeing our volunteers and AmeriCorps members and staff, and they want to be together. And we have these wonderful videos of people you would never expect to want to learn hip hop, doing these hip hop dance. Even really introverted people are super jazzed about doing hip hop dancing. So think first about what programming can you offer, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, and how in that programming can you build social connections that are really, in our view, going to be the thing that brings people back and helps people stay connected to your organization during this unusual time. And then the second reason we find people participating in our programs is if they're education-based, so webinars on these topics of interest to our community. And the way that we approach those two types of programs is very different. We don't provide connection opportunities in educational sessions because it just doesn't work. I guess if you were doing an educational program with a small group of 8 to 12 people, you could. But when it's primary education, like this program that we're doing today, there's a bunch of you on the meeting. It just doesn't make sense to try to build your social connections to each other. That's not why you're here. You're here hopefully to learn something during the governor's conference. So as you're thinking about building your program, I would think about why will people come and how can I build either education or connection as the key mode of the program. So getting participants started in social groups, and we say social groups, we mean virtual camp, we mean support groups, we mean book club, we mean all the things we've talked about. Those are all social programs. So we have found that outreach in multiple ways is critical to get people over the initial threshold to participate. And this has been true at Epilepsy Foundation New England since before the pandemic. So when we were encouraging people to participate in in-person Young Leaders Network or support groups, it took a lot of energy to get them to come to the first thing. And we don't misunderstand that to be they're not interested and this program is no good. We take it that it's hard to do something new. It's hard to go to your first PTO meeting. It's hard to go to your first fifth day of fifth grade. It's hard to go to a new place of worship. And in all those same ways, it's hard to come to a new program, and in some ways it's even harder to come to a new virtual program. So passively posting things on Facebook, creating an event, doesn't work. Putting things on our website doesn't work. Sending an e-newsletter about our programming doesn't work. What works is doing all those things and having telephone, text, and private social media outreach to the participants and potential participants. Again, our AmeriCorps members have been critical to provide us the bandwidth during this time to do that outreach. If we didn't have them, it would be really hard for us to be successful in the, literally hundreds of communications we exchange a day with our participants. We also find that reminders are critically important in the virtual space in particular. So I would not hesitate to over-remind people about an upcoming program. For example, you might send, or we do send, the week before the programs, we send a message that has a calendar of here's what's coming up next week. We have our AmeriCorps members and staff reach out to the participants through text and phone and email and any kind of method that works and is available. And then often we'll send a message the morning of the program, and then often we'll have to send the message 15 minutes before the meeting is supposed to begin. And the more impaired and the more older the participants are, the more this is necessary. So I would make a path to ensure you have multiple reminders. For us, the first time someone joins a meeting, we have found that most people well, not most people, but a fair amount of people have a hard time the first time they come to a new program. And that could be because they are not comfortable in Zoom. It could be because they don't know anybody in the group. It could be for any number of reasons. So anticipate that when someone comes to a meeting for the first time that they're going to need extra outreach and support. Here again, having AmeriCorps members and volunteers is really important to getting this done, because if the person jumps onto the meeting and then signs off after 5 minutes, you might have someone reach out to them either during the meeting or right after the meeting and checking out what happened there, were you uncomfortable, would you come back again? Those are important questions. And then we've also found that people often will join the meeting for the first time with their screen off and their mute button on the whole time. It's almost like they're auditing the program, and that's okay. It's okay to make space for people to get comfortable. In some ways, the virtual space is even more effective for people who have anxiety about joining new things.
So in our programs, not every program has the capacity to do this, but we always have at least 2 people on a program, and they communicate before, and they say, okay, I'm leading the activity, be it whatever, be it Play-Doh making, and then, Sarah is on the famous admit button, for the people who come late, and then also say the chat button. And the chat button can be anything from the people asking questions like, what's your Roblox name, to the person like Michaela from VNH who is on, whatever you call that, video block, and also mute. Now she's on video block and mute because this is a conference, but if, say this were a social group, Sarah from EFNE is going to say, hey, Michaela, did you get that? Do you have all the ingredients? What's going on? Do you know anybody? Is this your first time? What state you in? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and sort of get a feel for why is she, do you want to turn your video on? Why aren't you turning your video on? Oh, my video doesn't work. I don't have video, whatever. We have some kids, everyone from selective mutism, for there's a reason why this is occurring, to that kind of helps engage them. We have that even in our parent group. We have some parents who literally have questions, will call me all day with questions, but then don't ask the questions in the parent group because they're too nervous for whatever reason, or they'll ask the questions in the sidebar, but you also have somebody facilitating the group, and it's distracting to pay attention to the sidebar. So having 2 people on the group, so Sarah is also contributing to the group. She's saying, hey, Michaela from VNH, you're just the next person over on the screen, So she's also engaged in the group, but she's really also her primary role, or one of the roles that we've discussed prior to the group, is that she's going to pay attention to the chat bar, and she's going to say, oh yeah, Michaela, you had a question about zonisamide, which is an epilepsy drug. Is anybody else on zonisamide? Does anyone want to talk about that? She had a question about her son and his reaction to the heat this summer. So that's one way to keep people that are engaged, is the chat bar. We have had other issues with the chat bar, but that is one way to keep people who are
like dark,
yeah, or whatever we call it, slang, Zoom slang.
In terms of scheduling, the time of the day is really highly dependent on your population and also on the changing seasons. When we first started, our teens liked meeting at 7 p.m. Now, I think less so. People want to go outside at 7 p.m. because it's June and they want to be outdoors. What we've learned about time of day is really just think about your population and what's going on. If you're going to do a service for families with small children, I would stay away from 12 to 2:30, which is typically nap time for that group. We have a group of older adult men that are meeting, that are in their 70s, and they seem to prefer the middle of the afternoon on Sundays, so that's what we're doing with them. As we thought about our virtual camp schedule for the upcoming season, we have our Little Kids program happening at 9 a.m. It's 9 a.m. to 10:30. It starts next week, and then a whole nother week in August of Little Kids. But then as we're thinking about our middle school program, those kids are still sleeping at 9 o'clock in the summer. So they're actually going to meet from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. at night. And then days of the week, same thing, just really take into consideration what the flow of your community is, your target audience is, and how it's changing as we move through seasons and how it's changing as we move through things reopening. We, as I mentioned, are having a Sunday afternoon group. That's when our older adult men like to meet. But generally speaking, I think it would be really hard to get people together in the middle of the day on a Saturday in the summertime. And then consistency. So we have found generally that while we said earlier flexibility and adaptability are critical, if you can keep your program time consistent, it's important. So if you have a weekly meeting every Tuesday at 4, you have a support group or an educational program or a read aloud for your target group, I would try to be sure that it's every Tuesday at 4 and not have it be Tuesday at 4 for 3 weeks and then Fridays at 3. And then we've also found that, especially with our people who are struggling, that you really need to have the program be every single week. If you go to an every other week schedule or every 3 weeks or even once a month, people forget about the program. So if you can keep it to consistent scheduling that people know what to expect, then I think we would advise you to do that. So we want to tell you about our most popular activities that we have found. I want to go back and say that the most important thing about our programs is connection or education, but these are we're going to tell you the things that we have found that have really worked. Good point, Chanda. Alan, are there any questions?
There are. So one question that was asked more than once was, how do you handle limiting factors such as technology, both within the older population and your participants?
That is a really good question. Chanda, do you want to take it?
Sure. So we actually haven't run into that. We have one child, guy, man. I always have trouble with man.
He's 18.
He's 18, boy, who does not have a video on his. I don't understand the whole thing. He doesn't have a video, and we actually had another member of the group buy it for him. So that was handled, but then we haven't had a limited. We haven't run into that.
Yeah, we have a pretty economically diverse clientele, and it's surprising how little we run into this. We also have we're starting a new Massachusetts AmeriCorps program called the Epilepsy Resource Rooms, and we've been working really closely with our professional advisory board on this. And we had a discussion about how can we provide virtual services to your patients in September, and there were only 2 or 3 doctors that said they had any patients who had trouble with having their clients have webcams. So it seems like more people are having access than not.
And at this point, the libraries, I know, and you guys are all in New Hampshire, and we're coming to you. I'm sorry, I apologize for this, but we're coming to you from Massachusetts. However, I actually happen to know the New Hampshire library as well, and you guys have a fantastic library system. I actually happen to be really into libraries, but you can lease or rent, I don't know the correct word, terminology, computers, not phones, but computers from libraries. And I also know that track phones are really easy to get. I know a 7-year-old who has bought a track phone with unlimited minutes that calls me incessantly and takes pictures and sends them to me. So technology, if you do a little bit of research and provide that information for your clientele, it's not hard to accommodate. They can either get it for free from their library or, like I said, track phones.
Great. There was another question of, do you feel that you're able to serve more people in this remote fashion because they're not limited in getting to you physically?
Yeah, we've actually had a huge surge in services, an enormous surge in services, because people with epilepsy often can't drive. And also, we serve a 4-state region, so sometimes we're running programs in Lebanon, and the person lives an hour and a half away. So it's really difficult for the family to make the commitment to bring a kid or an adult that far for a 1 hour or 2 hour program. So indeed, we have found a huge uptick in service usage, and it's really a silver lining for our community.
Okay, she says that I also do have epilepsy and work for the Epilepsy Foundation. So I've heard the quote, it's not social isolation, it's social liberation for people with epilepsy. That being said, the community I serve now, I have the opportunity to serve them more frequently. That being said, there are a lot of things, just like everybody else, there are a lot of things that we cannot do, and there are a lot of people in a lot of ways that we are not able to serve because of pandemic.
Give me an example.
Mike Kelly. Okay. So there are a lot of ways. Laura Mansfield. So there are a lot of people that are crossing state lines. Josh Miner lives in Tennessee. He's a kid. This is confidentiality that we're saying below their first and last names. There's a kid that used to live in Massachusetts, the area that we serve, moved to Tennessee. We have a strong relationship with them. It's served really well now by our services. We're able to serve all of New Hampshire, and New Hampshire is actually being served better because they're also being served by, or forming strong relationships with kids in Rhode Island, Maine, Massachusetts, and very frequently throughout the week. That being said, there are kids that aren't being served as well
because they really need the in-person connection.
Because they need that. And not only that, I do think that there is a ceiling at which, when you are, and I've experienced this personally actually, when you're connecting through a computer, I do think that we can connect well, especially me. I tend to be pretty animated as a person, like just in life. But I think there's a ceiling at which you can connect cognitively. So I think that there's a group of people, Lila, Shane, cognitively, who are not able to connect abstractly through a screen. They're not able to connect to that as a person. Maybe they're able to hear a voice, and we're learning from specialists how to connect to them, but they're not able to connect to them as a person because they're more able to connect to things like physical touch, eye contact, because they're more physically, cognitively disabled. So I do think that there's a disadvantage. I think there's advantage, and I think there's disadvantage as well.
Well, let's move on. So in this slide, we wanted to just give you sort of a bulleted list of some things that we've found that worked really well. Sarah, do you want to talk about some of the programs of Kids Connecting Camp that are going really well?
I think all the programs are going really well. But so we currently have one that's early in the morning, and it's a short story time. It's also with our mascot, Hope the Lion. So it was actually intended for preschool to second grade, but we have a lot of teenagers joining, all different ages. They prefer the shorter time. A lot of kids with epilepsy also will struggle with attention span where they're not able to focus for that long a time. So they like the shorter one where it's a short book, a lot of different activities. Our Kids Connect also, what we do is kind of move it up to a little different level where all of our activities are able to change. So for the younger ages, we try not to do one thing for the whole hour session, and break it up into multiple activities so we can keep the attention focused. I also have learned through my time and my own child here that just is right next to me, who also has epilepsy, and that you really have to be ready and watch the screen with all the kids and everything, and to see who's paying attention. After getting to know them, you know how to be able to pull in that whole crowd, so that way you don't have kids falling asleep or not paying attention or leaving the screen. So it's really important to keep them all engaged, and when they're all engaged, they're all having fun and they continue to come back.
Right, so for the younger kids, having multiple activities within the half hour to the hour is important. And then, Chanda, do you want to talk about some of the things that have been popular among the YLMs?
I think the Young Leaders Network just like to be there to be with each other, and that is the main goal. So they go, and sometimes we start doing one thing and we end doing another. You get somebody saying, I'm really shy, let me tell you this poem of my life. So screen sharing, you have to set limits, say everybody has 20 seconds to screen share. Otherwise, they'll share and share and share and share and share. Cooking has been fun, but you have to know that during cooking, you have to know your audience, because there may be some kids who are really there needing some support, okay, Sarah, do you have 2 cups of sugar? Let me see your 2 cups. And somebody who's making a completely different recipe, making meatballs when everyone else is making brownies. So cooking has been really popular. They like to make art, but they like to make art kind of on their own and share it. Mostly they like to share what they're doing, and mostly they just like to be together, is what I would say.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think.
Well, I think songwriting.
Songwriting, but mostly in sharing. Yeah, sharing again what they're feeling and what they're writing and what they're doing. Hip hop has been, it's shocking to me, shocking. People you never thought to turn on, people who have been dark the entire time, all of a sudden are dancing, are doing the worm. The worm. Hip hop has been really popular, and peer-led activities. You know, you say, hey, who wants to lead an activity? Oh, I do, okay. And it can be anything from like a 26-year-old teaching 23-year-olds how to make Play-Doh. That what's going to happen to the Play-Doh after the session is over, I don't know, but giving them the chance to lead and teach, and you have to help a little bit because they don't necessarily know how to engage everybody, but peer-led activities and letting them decide to do what they want to do, and it doesn't matter what they want to do, teach a dance, make Play-Doh, bracelet making, arrange flowers, it doesn't matter, but peer-led and giving them the stage. Mostly giving them the stage in their voice.
Great. And then I would say for our adults, the most popular program so far has been our educational programs. People are coming to those, webinars and conferences. And then I mentioned earlier, we have a book club that is seemingly our most successful adult program.
Dog training has been really popular. We have a gentleman in our group who is actually an exceptional dog trainer, and he speaks really well to the kids. And I wish I could remember his quote, but it was something like, teaching is an understanding, I think might have been it. And he really speaks to everybody and how he wrangles all the kids and the dogs. We limit it to 5, and that has been really popular. But the other thing I would like to say is that I do get a lot of requests for both movies and video games, and I deny them. And as much as I am a strong advocate for the kids to connect, to meet kids where kids are, I also am a strong advocate for our mission and healthy lifestyles, healthy living, and connecting in healthy ways. And I can't control it. I can't control that they're gonna not meet whoever. And I also know that one of the complaints I get from a lot of parents is that my kid is up until 1 a.m. playing video games, and we have done Netflix parties, and we continue to do it, and the kids continue to request it, and it's our least attended activities. So we do movies. The kids request video games, and I thus far have refused. We have done board games, and they weren't wildly successful, and we kind of abandoned them a little bit. We may go back to them, but I refuse to do video games. So if you want to delve into that, good luck.
Okay. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because I see we're kind of running a little bit short on time. But I've already mentioned that our emergency response plan is we always have 2 people in the meeting, 2 leaders in the meeting, and we use breakout rooms in the event of an emergency. And we're always sure to have the participants' emergency contact information. So in our case, it would be a seizure. If someone starts to have a seizure, they're placed in a breakout room with one of the leaders of the group, and that leader calls the emergency contact to be sure there's someone there to provide epilepsy seizure first aid to the person. And that may not be the case. You may not have a disease community that you're working with, but you may have other calls for emergency contact, so you might want to think about having an emergency response plan in place, no matter who you're serving. Platforms. So I think it's important to think about what's going to work best in your community. We played with platforms for a long time, really in February and March and into April. And we have found that Zoom, which we're using right now, is the most effective space for us and the most affordable. Thinking about whether you're using a meeting versus a webinar. So a meeting is an opportunity for people to interact, whereas a webinar is not. People can't interact in the webinar space. We also have had great success with GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar, but it's much more expensive than Zoom and doesn't have any additional features that we find helpful, except for it has an evaluation option at the end, which I think Zoom actually has added recently as well. And then Uber Conference, I've had so many challenges with Uber Conference over the last few weeks. I'm not really sure if it's me or Uber Conference, but that platform is the least effective one for us. Breakout rooms are really important to use in groups, and if you're going to run virtual spaces using virtual programs using Zoom, you need to get good at understanding how breakout rooms work. It's not that complicated. Again, it's practice, practice, practice. Set up a meeting with your friends and family and practice how to send people to breakout rooms and how to bring them back. To chat or not to chat, so Chanda mentioned that we use the chat feature to help our participants engage in the program. So if Jimmy is not participating, we have AmeriCorps members or staff that start to chat him up and to make sure that he's engaging. Chat can become a problem if you start to have people interacting in sort of a, I don't know, clicky, negative something on the side that everybody can see. And especially since we work with a lot of young adults and teens, if it starts to feel like the people in the chat are like the cool kids who aren't really paying attention and they're only talking to the other 3 cool girls in the group, then we shut it down. So I think it depends on the population you're serving. I think be prepared to shut the chat down at any time if it starts to become toxic. We require people to pre-register for our meetings, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One of the important ones is when they pre-register with us, they sign a media release so that we understand if it's okay for us to capture recordings or post pictures of the Zoom meetings to our social media channels for promotional purposes after the fact. And then privacy and passwords. So I haven't heard of this much lately, but towards the beginning of all of this, there was a lot of hijacking of Zoom meetings going on where all of a sudden your screen would turn and you'd be looking at unwanted and terrible footage. That never happened to us, but we wanted to be really sensitive to it. So we do set up passwords for almost all of our meetings. That makes it kind of difficult because we can't just put out a Facebook message that says, join us tonight at 7 o'clock and here's the link. We have to have them register first, and that is an extra step, but we feel like it's an important safety feature that we like implementing. For recording, we do record most of our meetings, but we have to make sure it is a law, as I think you know, that you have to ask people's permission before you record them. We find it really helpful, mostly for promotional purposes, to be able to go back and look at footage and use some of it to encourage other people to participate, and also, of course, to send to our donors. You should get comfortable with the engagement features on whichever platform you choose. Things like being able to put a clapping hand up, the chat. Sarah, what are some other engagement features that you use?
I share my screen and show videos. Sometimes we use the poll. We play that game. We play some games. I can't remember what it's called, but where they say like dogs or cats, like which one do you like better? Mostly they just talk and share their drawings and stuff.
Yeah. And then again, you know, whatever platform you're using, I'm really comfortable in Zoom now, but I wouldn't be comfortable running a virtual group with teens by myself unless I spent some time doing a lot of practice. So I would encourage you to make sure you have all control over your technology before you get started. In terms of running a meeting, we talked about these items a little bit before, but prepare for the meeting, make a careful plan about what you're going to do, what the activity is, and then be expecting the need for flexibility and adaptation. We mentioned earlier, you need to provide multiple reminders to participants. We have found generally more reminders required in this environment than in the in-person environment. As a presenter, and we encourage and are about to require all of our AmeriCorps volunteers and other leaders to sign on early to every program. We need to be there 15 minutes in advance. I just mentioned that we had a problem setting this meeting up, an unexpected problem that no one would have anticipated, but if the person that was having the trouble hadn't signed on 15 minutes early, we would have been struggling during the first 5 minutes of the presentation, and that's not okay. We do require the use of the waiting room feature in Zoom, meaning that everyone signs on and gets placed into a waiting room, and then we let everybody in. And we do that because it allows the staff or the team to have a little chat before we get ready and to kind of see who's arriving. And then having them all basically come into the room sort of at the same time, there's something to be said for that, as opposed to having people stagger in where you're starting to chat with somebody and then a new person comes in and you're going to go back to the beginning. The first 5 minutes of every meeting seem to be really challenging, and that's for at least 5 minutes, and that's for groups that have existed for a long time. You know, we know at our house when Chanda's running a 1 o'clock meeting that between 12:55 and 1:10, it's going to be total chaos and meltdown. And the reason is no matter how many times you send a reminder and the link and the information, I can't find the link, I can't sign on, the password isn't working, my technology isn't working, can you send it to me again, can you send me the password, I lost it. And these are everybody has this challenge. So if you start a program at 1, I would expect that you really won't be able to get started at the earliest until 1:05. And finally, have a plan and prepare to adjust when it doesn't go the way that you expect. If you have a guest speaker and they don't show up, or they can't sign on, or their internet crashes, or their bandwidth is low, or their phone disconnects, make sure you are in a space where you can handle the ability to pivot quickly. So I see we only have 5 minutes left, and we were hoping to do a breakout room at the end, but I think instead of doing that, we're just going to kind of power through and get you the information that we were hoping to provide to you in the time we have allotted. We'd also sent Michaela a virtual best practices manual that has a lot of information in more narrative form that you can look through. I'm sure Michaela will provide that to you. And in terms of the breakout rooms, if you would like to have a follow-up conversation, especially with Sarah or Chanda or me, we will make ourselves available to do that after the conference through Michaela. Okay, so best practices 1, face and lighting. Try to make sure that your lighting is in front of your face, not behind. If you have a big picture window behind you, it's going to be really hard for people to see you. And you should try your best to be centered on the screen whenever possible. And we found, generally speaking, that while we don't necessarily need everybody to be so close up, you don't want it to be so far back that people can't really see what you're doing. And that's especially important when you're engaging new people. If they can't get a feel for you because they can't really make out you, then that doesn't work. So I would recommend being sort of filling the screen if you can with your face. Obviously select the quietest room and location that you can find. This is a crowded challenge in my house with my dogs and my kids, but we try our best to make sure that we put all those things away and create private space, especially if you're giving a presentation. Be sure to think about anything in the background making noise and turn those things off. Put your pets somewhere where they can bark or meow in peace. Same thing with your children. And then if you have multiple devices in the same house for whatever reason, you're going to get feedback. So occasionally, if you sign on with your cell phone and your computer, if you don't use the phone audio feature on Zoom, you're going to get feedback. As Chanda mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, if she and I were both signed on to this meeting at the same time from different computers but in nearby locations, we would get feedback that would cause a really irritating echo. It's important to pay attention to your nonverbal body language. So hopefully you've noticed that I've been sitting up and engaged and smiling, and that's kind of who I am. But if you have members or volunteers who are sort of slouching, or people notice that stuff and they don't like it and they feel like it's personal. So it's good to pay attention to your nonverbal body language. Sit up straight if you can, and smile and look right into the camera, even when it's not your turn to talk, when you're serving people. Arrive early, we already talked about. You should know that you're going to, just like in an in-person group, have to occasionally redirect people or mute participants. So we have some people in our group who become inappropriate or go so far off on tangents and we can't really bring them back. In the in-person space, we might go over and put a hand on that person's shoulder and help provide one-on-one support, but we can't do that so well in this virtual space. So we want to encourage you to know that you might have to mute participants, and that feels really rude and awful, but you might have to do it to avoid syncing the group, and then follow up with the person after to be sure they understood why you did what you did. As a general rule of thumb, the facilitators should talk about 30% of the time and listen 70% of the time. If you're doing all of the talking, you're not engaging your community, and they're not going to walk away with like, oh, that was so much fun. People really like to hear themselves talk and to talk. So that, as Chanda mentioned, the participants in our program, they just like to share and share and share. So be sure you let them do that. Let's see, if you have people on mute and everyone's on mute and it's a large group, make sure that you have a plan for participants to indicate that they'd like to talk, like by raising their hand or using the raise hand feature or some other method that makes sense for your group, so that you can pay attention to when people want to chime in. Right, so we talked about the mute feature, and I'm just moving fast now to see that we're just about out of time. More best practices. Make sure you make time for small talk. If your activity is so structured and regimented that people don't have time for sidebar chatter or just sort of talking about the weather, I don't think you're going to have as high of a satisfaction rating. In every group, make sure everybody has a chance to share something. And then if you're in a very large group, you're going to want that sharing to be a yes/no question or a one-word answer. For example, the one-word questions would be, what do you prefer, summer or winter? If it were a small group, you could say, what do you prefer, summer or winter, and why? Or what's your favorite summer memory? Those would be good questions in a larger sharing situation. And always be sure to welcome newcomers to every group. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but people have a lot of anxiety about coming to new things. So we encourage you to call out newcomers and ensure that they feel welcomed and heard and connected.
And in a normal group, you might not call out newcomers. In a Zoom group, you would more than you wouldn't in a individual.
Yeah, you get more in the virtual space than you would in an in-person space. So these are new social skills for everybody. We would encourage you, especially if you're serving children or impaired people, to ask their caregivers to practice some skills before they come to their first meeting, that they know what to expect. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get this link, you're going to sign on, and all of a sudden, 10 people are going to appear on your screen. If you don't explain those things to certain populations, it can be very startling. Talking about things like the mute feature and etiquette in advance with children is really important. And then follow-up is critical to virtual programs. It's not a one-and-done deal, especially if you're trying to build community or long-term connection. We encourage our participants, staff, volunteers, AmeriCorps, and participants to connect on social media. There are rules in place about what's allowed and what isn't. TikTok is becoming a hot channel, and a lot of people are TikToking. So if you aren't on TikTok yet, you should get on TikTok because that's where everyone's going. It's a great way to stay connected. And check in and check out. So after the meeting, especially if you have the luxury of having AmeriCorps members, asking people to follow up and say, hey, how did you think that went today? Or what was your experience of the program? Or I noticed you were a little quiet today, or you seemed sad. Those are great opportunities to build connections that are really, in our organization, the lifeblood of our organization. And I suspect that for most nonprofits, those personal relationships are essential for your success. Okay, so we were going to do breakout sessions. I'm sorry that I didn't manage our time more effectively. As I mentioned, Sarah Specht runs our summer camp programs and our Kids Connect programs through the year. Chanda is our director of youth services and runs our teen programs and our teen support groups. And I do a variety of things with the rest of my team and serving other populations. So if we can help you with other things as we go forward, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm sorry, I see that we're 3 minutes over time, and I apologize. Alan, do you have any questions you want to provide?
There was really only one other one that was, do you guys communicate with your clients' schools? And if so, how is that going? And do you have an effective way of doing that?
We do communicate with our clients' schools, generally speaking, in the world. We haven't done anything special with communicating with school in the virtual space.
That's not true.
Yes, we do. We have communicated with the kids' schools, especially at the very beginning when the kids' schools hadn't provided yet any curriculum. And then also the kids who are more severely impacted, we've communicated with their schools and how's the best way to include Lila in dog training when she's a kid who's in her wheelchair and she's not really participating. Her brother Jude is actually participating in the dog chair. What's the best way to include her in dog training? And or how do we use Shane's eye gazer in story time, for example, or in XYZ? We communicate with kids' schools in that way, but it's all parent-led. We don't initiate. I don't think legally we can initiate it.
Yes, usually the parent makes the connection.
Usually the parent makes the connection for us. Yeah.
Alan, was there anything else?
There was not anything else.
Okay, great. So I mentioned that we also had sent Michaela a link to a video clips of things that we've been doing that might be interesting to look at. And then there's this virtual best practices handbook that we created that we hope you find helpful. I really apologize for going over time. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk with you today. We hope you found it helpful. Wish you so much success in your new online world that we're all in.